Hello, and welcome to the first ever virtual edition of SASCC Talks. My name is Tyler Taylor. I'm the host for today. And before I can tell you about SASCC Talks, I want to tell you who SASCC is, who we are, what do we do. So SASCC is actually short for Saratoga Area Senior Coordinating Council. It's a really long name, so we tightened it up. And we are a SASCC organization, so the name does fit. So our organization is a nonprofit 501c3. We've been around for just over 40 years in the Saratoga area, and we have 4 distinct operations. So we are a senior services agency. We operate a senior center, an adult day program, a transportation program called RIDE, or Reach Your Destination Easily, and we also put out a community newspaper called The Outlook. This paper goes to every home in the city of Saratoga, as well as several hundred homes in the surrounding communities. So SASCC is a longtime organization, and we are a part of the Silicon Valley Age-Friendly Network. Our city is designated in Saratoga as an age-friendly community, and so we take on different projects and programs that help to connect the generations. So that is actually how SASCC Talks was born. SASCC Talks is a program that is designed to kind of bridge the gap between the generations. So we partner with Saratoga High School and other high schools in the area, as well as our older adult population in Saratoga and the surrounding community. And we get them to come together to hear an engaging speaker, prominent person within the community, and talk about current topics of the day. And the idea is to get the perspectives going between the two generations. We all kind of understand that technology has created a divide for some people in being able to relate to each other, understand each other's perspectives. And so this is kind of a way for us to bring our different generations together, talk about a common subject, and learn more from each other because of it. Our very first SASCC Talks was held last year, and we were very fortunate to have former Santa Clara County Supervisor Ken Yeager be the prominent guest speaker. And he came and spoke about the 2 booklets that he put out that were detailing his engagement in the struggle for LGBTQI+ rights in Santa Clara County, as well as the fight against HIV and AIDS. It was a very compelling discussion that took place. You could definitely see the differences in the perspectives between the youth and the older adults. And it was a very good example of what you can do when you bring those type of groups together and have a real conversation about something meaningful. If you're interested to see how that went, you can visit our website at www.sascc.org, and we have all of our videos up there. So today, we are very, very fortunate to have with us someone who's very special, very dear to our organization, has been a strong supporter for seniors in this area for as long as he's been around. California State Assemblymember Evan Lowe. So we want to welcome Evan to the program. How are you doing?
Well, hello, my dear friend. It's good to see you. I miss seeing you in person, but your vivacious smile and your energy is very clear. So it's wonderful to see you, and thank you very much for having me.
Thank you. Thank you for being here. It's a real pleasure to have you. So, Evan, before we get started, today, as you heard from the intro, we're going to talk about topics of the day that pertain to seniors, younger people, and just a shared perspective. But we do like to get to know our guests a little bit more. So we have a couple of questions that I'm just going to break the ice with, and then we'll get into a little bit more of the substantive material. So, for you, Apple or Android?
I'm the hometown. I have to make sure that we are supporting local business. So to all of our friends out there, make sure that we are supporting our local community.
All right, excellent. Mondays or Fridays?
Every day seems to be a Monday and or a Friday these days. They all come together. So I'm excited about every single day. I know this is a very politician answer to give, but it's the truth.
It can be true, though. That's the thing. All right, and last one of these is hot or cold?
Cold.
Okay.
Don't like to sweat, because you got to clean up after yourself a little bit, and sometimes you might not. No one wants to sit around you. If you're a little hot and you're sweating, and then you have some other ailments, you want to be cold.
That's a good point. All right, so that's kind of the lightning round questions, just to get to know you a little bit better. What do you think? So tell us a little bit about your life growing up. I know you're from around this area. Where did you grow up, and what was life in your community like?
Well, again, let me just first off thank you again for your dedication. You're continuously advocating for the issues related to SASE and beyond, and not only with that of yourself, but also family. Seems to be a family affair. So I was genuine when I said it's good to see you, but I know that I'll be seeing you probably next week and the following week at some other functions and events too. So I just want to say that for all of the listeners and viewers as well. Again, I think it's important that to answer your question, to engage in a thoughtful approach to what we're attempting to do right now within our daily lives. And I think we have an opportunity to pause and to think about the important things in life, but also how we are interconnected and how we can help each other. And that's what the primary focus has been of late, to ensure that what are we doing each and every day to check in on one another and to do what we can to assist in so many of the different things that are impacted in our daily lives. We are a neighborhood, we are a community, and let's ensure that we're looking out for each other.
That's very well said. And, in dealing with some of the younger folks who submitted questions and wanted to know more, one of the things that came up, because, you were I believe, the youngest elected official in this area to be elected to office, and the youngest mayor. I don't know what record that is, if that's for the whole country, the state, or what have you, but I know you're a record holder in a few different ways. But when did you know that you really wanted to get into this field?
I didn't. Within the culture of the Asian Pacific Islander community, we are to become doctors, lawyers, or engineers, things that are relatively safe and not as stressful. Whereas the occupation of being on the front lines in politics is a full contact sport. And so initially, my family was not terribly happy about that, and they didn't even know if this was really an occupation. They just thought perhaps it was just a hobby. But I think when you see today the important work that needs to be done, and how fragile our society and how fragile our democracy can be, and who is making the decisions for us, is increasingly clear that we must hold our public representatives to account, and also ensure that they come from our communities and demonstrate the work with empathy, mercy, and compassion. And that's what is increasingly important to all of us, to ensure that we have a reflective society for everyone. But again, for the family and for culturally, it is not one that one would typically dip their feet in, but one that is of increasing importance each and every day.
Wow. Well, we appreciate the fact that, as you put it, you get into that full contact sport for the good of your community and the people you represent. We are appreciative of that effort that you make each and every day. Speaking of that, what are some of the things that you're working on right now that you'd like to kind of share with us? What's going on in Sacramento?
Yeah, well, people are hurting. And for so many, whether or not you're a small business owner, whether or not you're a parent, we want certainty. I think most of us are okay with saying that if you said, let us all shut down for 5 months or whatever the time frame might be, and then we can open back and be safe again. That's certainty, and we can deal with that. But what is difficult for us to deal with is the uncertainty that exists, which is to say that how long will this occur? And at what point can we get back to normal, so that we can plan our life decisions, that we can have our children back at school, that we can rehire, that we can open to the normal extent, that we can pay rent on time, that we can pay our bills in a fashion that which we understand. But that's not possible. And because of the challenge that exists, the reality is such that we've never dealt with something like this in our lifetimes, ever. None of us have. So how do we ensure, just given how government functions also, given the distinction between federal, state, and local, to engage and provide the framework so that we can be set up for success and have certainty for a pathway moving forward? And that's what we are attempting to do in real time. That's why you're seeing the executive orders and the press conferences from the governor in real time, on a weekly, if not daily basis to talk about the statistics and the data to which our infrastructure can and or cannot handle the increase of COVID-related cases. So as it sees the impact on the shutdown, we also need to make sure that we are accommodating for the fixes with respect to the impact to small business, to the healthcare field, to renters, tenants, all of the above. So we're attempting to work in real time to address and accommodate these issues. Similarly, the federal administration tends to not give us great certainty or clarity on the impact on the stimulus and ensuring that everyday Americans can be self-sufficient on a weekly basis. So we're looking at proposals to come up with, in absence of that, of clarity from the administration.
You know, that brings up a question that some of our youth have asked. And it's maybe more on the basic level in terms of when these very significant issues come to you and you are responsible for playing a role in shaping how the state and how your region is being cared for or planned for. What does it look like from the technical aspect of your colleagues, how you work with them, how you engage with them, and produce some of the bills and some of the solutions that you offer up?
It's complicated, but I'd say in short, it's this. Let us remember that we are in a pandemic, which is that of emergency orders. So what that means is that the governor has unilateral authority through executive orders just by a signature of a pen to change policy, to make law, in which that typically is reserved for the legislative branch. The legislative, just sort of government 101, there are three branches: the executive branch, which is that of the governor, the legislative branch, which is us, the Assembly and Senate, and then the judicial branch, which is our Supreme Court. So given the three branches are all equal, we have frankly ceded our authority on the legislative branch to focus on policy, to allow for the governor in these emergency times to do things in real time because of this pandemic. And so the question is, how do we make changes with law? Well, we can certainly still reserve our authority on the oversight and introducing legislation, but that tends to be sort of longer term. And with respect to the executive orders, working with the administration to identify the needs in real time. So for example, when we have teachers, students who are just about to graduate as our next crop of fresh teachers, or our nursing students who are just about to graduate but couldn't get their clinical hours requirement to graduate on time. These are the fixes that we need to make in real time to ensure that we have qualified first responders and otherwise in the field that we want to see and in real time. So we are having continued hourly, daily conversations about what that looks like.
Okay. Now that kind of leads me to ask a question about the coping and how we're all in the same boat when it comes to trying to figure out how to adapt to the new situation. Now for you, you like to be present in your community, in your district. And you've been several times here at SASCC. You host some wonderful events, in particular the Scam Stoppers event, which was crucial to seniors being able to identify and understand what comes their way and not fall victim to those crimes. You also came down here several times for the Veterans Day lunch, and you like to serve the meals to the veterans. And so being in person is kind of some of the magic of learning from your population, learning from your base, and seeing what it is that they need. How are you adapting to that in the current situation?
Every single day is a challenge. And I think it's important to also talk about that because, you know, we as public figures always try to put on a good public face. But the reality is we're also human beings. And I appreciate the question because there's a human element to the impact that we see. And part of that is I also want to provide an opportunity to thank my team and my staff of district representatives who are receiving numerous calls on a daily basis from everyday neighbors who are hurting, to which they are not able to access their unemployment benefits, to which they are asking for clarity and certainty on rent relief, or whether or not we can help them on their driver's license, or whether or not they don't feel safe or not, or where can they get protective equipment and feeling safe. And this, frankly, takes a toll on so many of us. But what I think is also important is that we must be there for each other. And that's why I encourage us all to not simply rely on government, but we must be active citizens. We must continually think about how we can spend each and every day to help each other. And that's why I talked earlier about referencing the point that we must check in and see how our friends, our neighbors are doing, and whether or not they need that leg up and hand on getting groceries, or whether or not we can help assist them with whatever needs that they might need as well. But that's why the organization of SASCC and otherwise are very important, because you have incredible access to the resources for everyday people who are hurting that might not be as informed on where they can go for food pantry help or other services as well. So we will try to utilize technology where possible, in absence of being able to be interconnected with each other. And those things that I just have deep emotion and feeling on when you reference the point, and I can recap my memory of serving seniors and being with you during Veterans Day and helping to listen and be part of the community.
Yeah, it always is a treat to be able to do that. And it is a challenge that a lot of folks are taking up to figure out how to stay in touch with people, especially those vulnerable populations that we serve. But as you said, the community-based organizations are doing their absolute best to both stay operational and to continue to provide their services with this new set of parameters. So I wanted to, we actually have a Q&A session that is open to our audience. And I've got our Q&A questions right over here that are popping up as we go through the conversation. So I'm just going to take some of these questions as they come in and share those with you. So this one is from a student at Saratoga High School and wants to know, from the state level, what can they expect this next year as far as K through 12 schooling goes?
That's the million-dollar question.
Yeah.
You can, again, I think it's important to be informed on how the structure of government is set up, which is that much of it is localized. So each school district has a different governing board that might make sense and have different policies. So in other words, the school districts in Saratoga, frankly, are different than the school districts in San Jose or in Cupertino, or the school districts in Santa Clara County are very different from those in Tulare or in Orange County, because of the different governing structures of the localized control. So the short answer is that there's not a one size fits all, but we are in significant conversation about utilizing technology for those school districts who wish to utilize distance learning, but ensuring that the students are equipped and the district is equipped with the technology. So in Silicon Valley, we might think that having an iPad or being able to Zoom like we are now is something that we just expect, but this is a luxury for some others in other communities. So partnering to ensure that the school districts are empowered to utilize that technology is effective. But again, the short answer is that it's very localized.
Okay, and that does make sense. People have to see what their unique features are of their schools and their districts, and there are people who are working on that right now. So that's that question. Now this one is coming from a Saratoga resident pertaining to housing in SB 35 that was passed. How do you feel about keeping that balance between providing that affordable housing, but also, making the existing residents of a community happy? I know that's a tough thing to weigh out, but how are your feelings about this now that there's been some time to evaluate the bill and the effects that it's had?
Yeah, well, the question is basically about how do we as a state and as a region continually address the housing crisis so that our families and our communities can afford to live in the communities that they grew up in. And that is increasingly clear. It's increasingly clear that that is not possible. The California and American dream is not attainable for the vast majority. It's only for the few. Specifically in our region, when you see the median income required of $275,000 to afford a single family home in our community, that's pricing a significant population out of our community. So the question is, how do we encourage additional growth of the housing units, but in a thoughtful approach. And the question addresses it specifically, which is that how do we make sure that we're not overdeveloping and changing the character and the makeup of our city, while also ensuring that we are doing our part in addressing the housing units to allow for affordable housing and the workforce that is required for us to be the economic engine of Silicon Valley that we are. And that is a balanced approach, but I also will suggest that it is not mutually exclusive. To say that we will continue to focus on additional housing units does not necessarily mean that it'll fundamentally change the makeup of a city. And so that's why there are certain protections and provisions in such mentioned legislation with respect to the developments only in certain areas near major transit corridors that make sense, and that we're going to apply the local control formulas accordingly. But it is also clear that local cities are not doing enough, that we will have this housing crisis, and that we must partner with the private sector to also build, because cities cannot build themselves. They must also, this is a private sector responsibility. So that's where I think in lies the difficulty of trying to get to the housing supply while also maintaining local control. And that's fundamentally what the bill attempts to do. Of course, there can be some significant reservation around that, but I think this is a proposal to which we will have something on the table with ideas to then make some necessary modifications where appropriate the following year.
You know, do you have a message? Because I know in Saratoga specifically, there was a development project in the Quito Village area, and there was quite a bit of vocal kind of disconnect with that proposal from the local community. When you have to make these type of decisions, or when you have to pick a way to move forward on an issue that there is contention about within your community, what type of factors play into your decision-making process, and how difficult is that from a personal level, being from this community?
Yeah, that's a very good one. A number of factors go into the consideration. Look, we are making decisions based on facts, science, and data. And if the question whether or not it's even on this COVID pandemic, and just as a reference for that, at what point, it's a clear question, it's a conundrum. So this is a health pandemic and a crisis to keeping communities safe. But at the same token, the longer this goes, livelihoods will also be put at risk. And so what is worse, to be bankrupt and go out of business, and or to have our systems overextended with respect to healthcare and not being able to provide the essential life-saving measures accordingly? And that's, do you want your left hand? Do you prefer your left hand or your right hand? And oftentimes it becomes such a narrative around that, zero-sum game. In the circumstance with respect to housing, it is such that it's a crisis. And to address a crisis, the solutions oftentimes will be quite bold. In other words, to address a crisis, incrementalism does not affect the crisis will still exist. That is the fundamental conundrum that we are in. But again, to the also other point that you brought about, which is that coming from the community, I also don't want to see 20 high-foot skyscrapers or housing developments. Saratoga is not San Francisco, but that's not what we're talking about here. What we're talking about is major transit thoroughfares and corridors, and we're talking about 2, 3, 4 stories in major corridors, not in single-family zoning. So that's why I think it's a deliberative approach to figure out what this means, and that's not always easy. And finally, let me just say along those lines, there will be absolute disagreement on these issues, but I'm hopeful that those that will disagree with the viewpoints will fundamentally understand to how a decision is made, and not to be demonized or come to some ulterior motive, but rather it's based on a significant belief, and we can agree to disagree. I disagree with my brother, my mother, and my father all the time, but we still have family dinners regularly. In fact, I'm getting dinner with him on Saturday to celebrate his birthday. But he and I disagree vehemently over dinner tables. But at the same time, we can still love each other, and I just hope that we can do that in our democracy.
That's an excellent point, Evan. And that's kind of why I wanted to ask that question, is because, a lot of times people who are in the elected official position, you take so much heat, and people tend to forget that you come from this community as well. You have a stake in the game in terms of being from the community and living in the community. And you're doing your best to move forward using the judgment that you were elected for. And so, it's not an easy thing, as you illustrated, but thank you for being willing to share that struggle openly. Speaking of another bill that people are asking a lot of questions about, it's actually Prop 16. Can you tell us a little bit more about Prop 16 and what your views are on it?
Sure. Prop 16 with respect to repeal of Proposition 209, and this is that of affirmative action. I know so many of us attended the rally of Black Lives Matter in Saratoga, and it was great to see the wonderful support from so many families here in Saratoga to come out and support the focus of us to address the significant racial injustice that exists in our community, and that we must demonstrate unconditional allyship and all across the sectors to repairing the systemic inequities that exist in our society. So this was for context, in Proposition 209, which was back in the 1990s, I was 13 years old then when this proposition was passed, but it prohibited the state from factoring in sex and race as factors on contracting, public contracting, employment, and also admissions in our higher education system. Proposition 16 before us in November would repeal that to allow for us as a state to factor in sex and race in public contracting and employment and in admissions in higher education, so that the focus could be that we must diversify, that we need more women, that we need more communities of color to be represented in our institutions all across the board, and that race matters, that we cannot be a blind meritocracy, but that race does matter. And that's why we were seeing with this Black Lives Matter movement and what's happened to George Floyd, race is a factor. And again, when we talk about statistics and data-driven policies, that's what we're focused on. We cannot have race-neutral policies for race-specific problems, and that's what we're attempting to address. And Proposition 16 will allow for everyday Californians to determine whether or not race matters in these conversations.
And it's going to go to the voters to determine that, as it should. So thank you for explaining that. There's been kind of a lot of questions about that particular topic, so that's great to have your insight on that. In terms of your legislative priorities, I know that COVID-19 and that response kind of prioritized certain things to the top and may have reprioritized other initiatives that you would want to go after or that might have been already on your agenda. What are your legislative priorities prior to COVID, and has COVID changed the nature of what you wanted to go after?
Yes, I since had to taper down my ambitions. Earlier this year, I introduced legislation on universal basic income. This was to provide basic income to everyday Californians so that everyone has basic income from the state of $1,000 a month. This was a proposal that we've seen as pilots in the city of Stockton. It's also a proposal that we've seen from presidential candidate Andrew Yang. And we've also seen basic income implemented also through the stimulus, which was that everyday Americans received a stimulus from the federal government, specifically around COVID. But because of the COVID pandemic and the cost of universal basic income in the state of California, that was paused and put on hold. So again, I had to taper the ambitions of that legislation. And since that is no longer moving forward in the California legislature, but I hope that we can bring it back, because we can see now more than ever how important universal basic income is, which is to say that if we all had basic income, that we would be able to address some of the ailments associated with all these societal problems and the pressures of everyday issues of paying rent, healthcare, putting food on the table alike.
Mhm. Yeah, this has definitely affected every single person, I dare say, on the planet, trying to figure out how to reprioritize their lives, their work, and things that maybe used to be important are down the list now a little bit further, and trying to deal with and understand this. Saratoga, as you know, is an aging community. It's roughly 30% of the people living here are over the age of 60, which is why it was so important for us to try to focus in on topics that pertain to seniors. However, with the age-friendly initiative that was started for our viewers, age-friendly, the initiative was started by the World Health Organization as a way to get communities to address the disparity when it comes to access and livability of communities for older adults. The theory is that those communities were designed by young people for young families back in the 30s and 40s and so on. And so didn't really take into account getting older successfully. So the age-friendly initiative is a plan that each community can adopt certain features of to improve itself. What age-friendly means to us is, again, part of why we're having this program, is to really bring the generations together. So learning about things that are important to the youth as well as things that are important to seniors, and finding those common points to be able to find solutions that we can all engage in together. So speaking of that, one of our high school students here is asking about public transportation. Our local transit authority here, the VTA, has had some difficulties and is cutting back funding for public transportation. That is something that affects both our seniors and our students. And with us, we did come up with a solution the best that we could, the RIDE program, which you were an early supporter of, thank you. And also our elected officials from this area all kind of bought in to help us to launch that program. And it's a successful program. Prior to COVID, we were trending to hit between 5,000 to 6,000 rides a year. And we were getting people out of the houses and out of that isolation. Now that they're back into the houses and now the isolation has increased for a lot of people, that access to public transportation becomes a little bit more crucial. What do you feel about the necessity for public transportation in this era? And if you have any thoughts on that, they'd love to hear it.
I have all kinds of thoughts on this. Again, the work that you are doing and that you are leading is transformational. And many can lead by example when we have good areas of success to amplify and replicate in other places throughout the state and throughout the country, which is very important. So I just want us to recognize the important work of so many of us here and commend you for that.
Thank you.
Let us also just now, unfortunately, talk about the realities of the time, which is that public transportation during the COVID pandemic, is it safe to take public transportation during the COVID pandemic? And the answer is probably not. That one would not want significant gatherings during this time. It's not recommended, just given the protocols in place. At the same time, I have the unfortunate nature of wanting to speak truth, which is during the COVID pandemic, we also caught the fairs, the Reibach fairs, that there's a significant hit to the revenues from the COVID pandemic of the ridership and that not coming about. And that, of course, sales tax and otherwise. So the ambitions, I think, are going to have to be put on pause, but yet we can still focus on the planning that when the resources do become available, and or to urge our federal representatives on the funding mechanisms to be able to do so, because, side note, the federal administration can print money. We as a state cannot. We have to balance our budget. That is where the realities that exist. So again, I am encouraged by the unique partnerships of being innovative to support public transportation. I've been a supporter of high-speed rail, public transportation all across the board. But again, just given the COVID pandemic of the fiscal impact, we are seeing that we may have to pause temporarily so that we can recover and keep the basic fundamentals on. Again, just for the viewers, when we talk about public budgeting, there's two essential public budgeting buckets, capital and operating. Capital is more of the infrastructure and long-term investments. Operating is day-to-day, keeping the lights on and paying the bills to keep everyday people working. So when we have these budgetary constraints, much of the focus is that on the operating, keeping everyday things running, whereas the capital side, the investments in infrastructure are kicked down the road. The can is kicked down the road, and we have to pause on that and just focus on the day-to-day operations. So again, I want to just share that to be as transparent and as direct on what is going on in our state so that we're informed about what we need to do should we still desire that as a priority. That is to advocate to getting our federal administration to get us the resources and bring the funding back here at home so that we can encourage and implement the type of public transportation that we know is necessary for the future.
I think that's a very important point. That advocacy role is something that as legislators, you do not only through the partnerships with your colleagues, but also through the development of bills and other proposals to really advocate for the solutions that we need locally. So that's a great point. We have another question from a high school student. This one is pertaining to school choice. How do you feel about school choice as it pertains to our Black and Hispanic communities?
I don't want to assume, but as I interpret the observation of such of equity, basic fundamental equity. And let me also just say this, for example, as well, too, that when we talk about, again, racial injustice and the inequities that exist in our public institutions, just let me share some observations. One, we have an overrepresentation of brown and Black communities in corrections, in prisons. And we have an underrepresentation of brown and Black communities in systems of higher education, and that the pipeline is so difficult. That's why we must rectify and help ensure that we are supporting underserved communities as much as possible institutionally by making policy reforms all across the board, not only just in education, but in places of healthcare. That the COVID pandemic is well documented, even here in Santa Clara County, that the COVID pandemic has disproportionately hurt brown and Black communities, even though those numbers are not commensurate in the county, which is that of the population of brown and Black communities does not justify the high impact of cases with respect to COVID. So we know that communities are impacted on healthcare, education, housing, employment, all across the board. And again, just back to that question, if we're thinking about rectifying systemic inequities, we must provide opportunities for all communities and underserved specifically to be targeted in this approach. And that's why, again, I was in support of Proposition 16, so that we can factor in race and sex in public institutions to allow for us to rectify and focus specifically on racial injustice that exists within our communities.
Okay. Okay, I've got another question. That this one is from both the seniors and the young folks. It's about the voting age. I know that you were a big advocate for getting the voting age lowered to 17. I think there is a little misunderstanding among some as to what that actually means, what elections can they vote in, and so on. And just for your info, some of the older population isn't so much in favor of it. The younger population's loving it. So can you tell us a little bit more about the voting age and some more information for the viewers?
Yes, think about how we can focus on civic engagement, which is that so many of our younger populations feel like they're ill-equipped and uninformed on the issues that are pertinent to them. This is also a personal perspective. I don't remember looking at a ballot in high school to say, here are the propositions and what is a proposition and what's the difference between an initiative and a proposition. And what is ballot arguments in support or oppose. I did not see many politicians coming to high school campuses asking for their support or their votes, or to talk about issues relevant to young people. But imagine if we were able to get a captive audience of young people who were then going to be in a state of transition, either in the workforce or going to college elsewhere. But we had an opportunity for them to exercise the right to vote. There's this notion of no taxation without representation. And yet we have young people paying payroll taxes. They are working. They are paying sales tax. They are engaged in our communities. So this proposal is going to be before the ballot also this November, Proposition 18, to allow 17-year-olds to vote in primary elections should they turn 18 by the general election. Now, you might think that this is sort of forward-thinking or a little bit out there, when in fact 18 other states already has this in law. And these are not blue states. This is West Virginia. This is Mississippi. This is Kentucky. Kentucky has already allowed this for multiple decades. So we want to encourage and empower young people to exercise their basic fundamental right to vote, because the reality is also this. Our generations has failed our next generation, our Gen Z. We have failed them to keep them safe in classrooms against firearms. That now, instead of when I went to school, we did drills, fire drills, earthquake drills. But now there are drills for active shooters. How is this possible? Our generation has failed them. The issue of the environment. I'm sure you turn on the TV every single day and you see the news reports saying record temperatures, record heat. I feel like this is a narrative that we see every single year, that we say record, record, record. And in fact, the data, always getting talking about data and science, the data speaks for itself. Increasing climate change. Every single year we're seeing that. So what are we doing as government and our elected representatives to say that climate change is real and that we need to ensure that we have the type of protections in place? Can, like my grandparents' generation, who worked 2 jobs to put food on the table, can you now work at a restaurant? Or can you work as a teacher surviving in our community to afford a home? Previous generations were able to, now not so much. Or even the issue of education, the cost of tuition. The cost of tuition in 1960 was free, whereas now many students will go into debt. And why do I bring up all of these issues? These issues disproportionately impact Gen Z. So it's important that we empower and allow them an opportunity to have a say in some of these issues that impact them. Finally, let me also just say this. Structurally, imagine then if we had politicians and candidates for public office going to high school campuses to which we can have town halls and educating and informing and inspiring a new generation of active citizens who will see, that candidate isn't so scary, and that they look just like me, and that, I too, as a female, can be president. I too, as the first in my family to go to college, can also be a mayor. And that's what we need to inspire, that politics is not a dirty word, that we must all actively answer that call to public service of active citizenry. And that's fundamentally what this is about, empowering a new generation of individuals to exercise the fundamental God-given right to vote.
Wow. I think that's fantastic. That's a great perspective. And I want to give a quick shout out to the city of Saratoga. They have a program here called Youth in Government. And it's a fantastic program. They select people from so many different candidates. They have teenagers apply for this. And I believe Mary Lynn Bernald on the city council initiated that when she was the mayor. And it's a fantastic group, and it educates them on the processes of local government. What is a planning department? What does the city council actually do? What does the city manager's office do? They take them for a tour around all of the different departments. They learn how these departments interact with each other to facilitate the running of a city. And they also meet the various partners that the city works with, our organization being one of them. And you just get to see the spark in their eyes as they kind of get this new knowledge and this new information about how their world works and how the things around them affect them, instead of just being a passive audience and being affected. So I think it's an excellent idea, to your point, of educating the youth about what these things mean, talking to them in a way that respects their intelligence and their access to information and their vote.
And the other thing is, I've heard some of the other opponents saying that young people are not mature enough to exercise a basic fundamental right to vote. But I can tell you, in our community here in Saratoga, I see multiple students in our region of the West Valley who have I've met students on planning commissions who have multiple patents pending, who are better public speakers, who are more knowledgeable, who know about coding more than I do. So I think if we give them an opportunity, we would be incredibly impressed.
Wow. To go a little farther down that route, how old were you when you first ran your campaign in Campbell?
I was 20 years old, and then
Wow.
officially the election came about when I was 21 years old.
Wow. I mean, that's just a baby step out of your teenage years. And so I think you're a great example of a young person who takes something seriously, wants to get involved to make change, and doesn't let age stop them. And that's a message that we send out to our older adult population as well. Don't let age stop you. Uh, Go after what you can go after with all of your strength, and you'll find people are there to support you doing that. So that's a great story. Okay, so somebody has a more of a general question. We've been hitting all these heavy topics. They want to know, what is it like for a day in the life of an assembly member? What does your typical day look like?
Ah, well, actually, maybe I can also ask my team to maybe provide a link as a follow-up, or even right now. We actually have a link in which we documented that day in the life of it. It's only like a 5-minute YouTube video to sort of go around and talk about that. But in short, the focus of the work is to legislate, to introduce and pass laws that help everyday Californians. And then also on the constituent services side, to help support everyday people here in the West Valley region who might not be able to get through that 1-800 line to the DMV, or has a tax issue and they believe that they are in the right, or whatever issues that there might be, but to help everyday people in their lives. And that's fundamentally what the job entails, to, again, be a legislator, which is that of to legislate and to introduce laws and pass laws, but then also on the constituent services side to help everyday people finesse and navigate the government bureaucracy that exists.
And you definitely have a very helpful office there in Cupertino. Patrick, Juliana, and several of your other staff members, I know that they're constantly dropping off materials and supplies, trying to find ways that they can put their office to work in the local community and to serve the people here. And I have firsthand experience with that. So I want to tip my hat to your team as well. They're a fantastic group.
Thank you. I mean, I'd also say that the primary focus and passion that I have and our office has is that of consumer protection. So, for example, if you believe that you're getting car repaired and that maybe you're getting some repairs that are not even called for, or that you're being charged too much, we can sort of look into that to identify whether or not there are additional consumer complaints and to file them, so that the Bureau of Automotive Repair can have that on their radar within licensing and make sure that there is nothing wrong going on with respect to consumer protection and ensuring that you are safe, whether that it's of your interface on automotive repair, or on your barber or stylist, or even with your physician, to make sure that you are getting the type of treatment that you should deserve and that you paid for.
Nice. So we'll go to one more question here. I think is a good one for working from home. We all, if you're still employed, you're fortunate, but for those of us who are still employed, we are working from home, and it seems that there are a lot of companies and corporations who might be looking at this as a long-term type of solution to, and I know County Supervisor Cindy Chavez was big on expanding that work from home program much further than the pandemic's end, to reduce traffic, to improve the air quality, and so on. For you, what are your thoughts about working at home as a long-term solution for our area, being that there's so many tech workers and folks that usually thrive okay working from home?
Yeah, well, I think it's important that I want to be very clear. I don't have all the answers.
Sure.
I just call it as I see it, based on the information that I'm provided. But this appears to be the new normal. And you can see that if we can function and get the end product done and be effective, that's great. But there's also a key thing that I have significant concern on, which is that of the human element. we've seen that so much of the communication now is on social media. But the information is so important, but that everyday citizens would feel more comfortable commenting or providing feedback in a different way, which is actually on the negative side, especially in this hyper politicized world. We're seeing so much of the hate rhetoric on social media. And there is something to say about human interaction, that when we are together, maybe if we are working remotely and we haven't seen our coworkers for a few months, we might send out a terse email or be short with them. Whereas I think if we have that human interaction of breaking bread and seeing each other eye to eye, perhaps we might be more kind and demonstrate more empathy and compassion when working with them, and understanding the stresses, so that if a coworker did not get you that report on time, that instead of sending off that terse email demanding it, you might frankly see them in person or realize that they also have childcare issues, or that they didn't tell you that they had some health ailments or some problems, or that they're taking care of an aging loved one. These are the things that I think are importantly critical, and especially something that I see in our world, which is to say that if you just talk to some of my coworkers and staff members on the feedback that they see on legislation or opinions, or on what their opinion is of the shutdown or the governor's executive orders, they're not very kind. And that's an understatement, putting it lightly. Whereas if we saw an individual in person, they would have an opportunity or give the benefit of the doubt to us as a government representative. And I'm just hopeful that we do not allow for the social distancing to get us away from the sense of that we are that much more connected, and we have much more in common that we have in opposition.
That's a great point. That really is a great point. You know, we need kindness in order to facilitate understanding. And if there's a lack of kindness or a lack of willingness to be at the table to hear not only just your own views validated, but the opposing views, when you do that, you allow people to get one step closer to each other and to share each other's perspective in a way that doesn't create barriers. So I think that's a great point. I'll share with you a little bit about how our organization is dealing with it, because we haven't had a chance to catch up.
Yeah, please.
So our senior center here, like every other senior center, is closed. And so that really cuts off a lot of opportunities that people did with their day-to-day life. Our adult daycare program is also closed. However, in my work on the County Senior Care Commission, the county approved a pilot program for adult daycare program services to be able to continue. It was originally intended to help subsidize low-income seniors who could not afford those services day to day. However, right when the contract negotiations were getting finalized and everything was set, that's when the pandemic hit and forced all the closures. So to the county's credit, instead of pulling that money back and saying, okay, you guys are closed up, we're just gonna find another use for this money, they allowed us to recreate the proposal to attempt to provide certain services remotely. It's a very innovative plan because adult day services, for those of our viewers who don't know, they're designed for supervision for your parent or loved one who may be a little bit less independent, may have physical, social, or cognitive impairments that require someone to kind of provide some tender loving care for them during the day, so that the family members can go take care of their daily activities, go to work, or just get some downtime to refresh themselves from their caregiving activities. So it's really designed to be an in-person type of program. But the county has allowed us to try some innovative models of combining Zoom and online activities with deliveries and assessments and resources for the caregivers themselves. So we are really initiating something that is not being done anywhere else. And this program, the success and merits of which will be kind of figured out over the next year, is something that all of the participating adult day programs have seen as a way to extend our services once we are actually allowed to reopen. So if you view things in a solutions-based way, you might find that some of the byproducts of this pandemic might actually turn out to be for the long-term benefit because we'll still be able to offer these remote services to clients who can't, for whatever reason, make it down to our center after we do reopen. That'll expand our ability to reach more people. It'll expand our capacity as an organization. And so I think that viewing things with that solutions lens it can be very helpful, although some things are more difficult to find solutions for than others. So Assemblymember Lowe, we're getting a little bit short on time here, but before we go, I wanted to give you an opportunity to have the last word and just give any message you'd like to our listeners today.
Well, thank you. I mean, just to comment on the work that you're doing, again, I just want to reaffirm the commitment that we have on supporting the incredible advocacy that you are doing and making sure that we are interconnected and helping people in their everyday lives. And we cannot forget about those most vulnerable, especially during these times. So let us use that as a reminder for the work that we need to do. Similarly to those watching, I think it's also incredibly important for me to just be a broken record and talk about us being active citizens. We can realize that how fragile our democracy is and how something like this no one ever guessed could have anticipated, but that we must hopefully do our own respective parts, not just simply rely on government, that the cavalry will come, but that we must all do our own parts as active citizens and help each other each and every day. But I will be readily available to assist, and I know the team is as well. So please don't be a stranger, and I look forward to seeing all of you in person as soon as possible.
Excellent. And for those of our viewers who wanted to ask a follow-up question, or maybe we didn't have time to get to your question that was submitted today, you can send all of your questions to assemblymember.low@assembly.ca.gov. And with that, I just want to thank you again for your time. I know that this is a very busy time for you, but we really appreciate the opportunity to spend some time, ask some of these questions that are important to our young folks, our older people, and everyone in between, and for carving out an hour of your time for us. We really appreciate it.
Well, thank you for you and your team, but let this be a continued conversation. And again, looking forward to seeing everyone in person very soon.
Absolutely. Thank you all of our viewers for watching our first ever digital version of SASCC Talks. We will be able to view this video on our website at www.sascc.org. You can also check out all of our other videos. You can see our past editions of the Outlook, and as well as find some excellent resources and help to get you through this time at home. Thanks again for joining us, and I look forward to letting you in on our next SASCC Talks. Take care, everybody.